The Galactic Council had made their decision final. The newly discovered dragon eggs from the war-torn planet Paraxis would be housed in the most secure facility in known space, Station Omega-7. These weren't ordinary creatures. The parent dragons had single-handedly held off 3 Imperial fleets before their tragic end. And nobody knew what their offspring might be capable of. Dr. Velkin, the station's reptilian administrator, stood before the massive containment chamber, his scaled hands clasped behind his back. The chamber walls were made of reinforced quantum steel, the same material used in battleship hulls. Energy barriers hummed with enough power to stop a freight cruiser. Temperature controls maintained the precise heat levels needed for proper dragon development. The containment protocols are foolproof, Dr. Velkin announced to the assembled xenobiologists from 12 different species. Each egg is monitored by 3 separate AI systems. The moment they hatch, automated defense systems will activate. Nothing gets in or out without authorization. The crowd murmured their approval. Everyone remembered the stories. Dragons were living weapons, capable of breathing plasma hot enough to melt starship armor. Their claws could tear through energy shields like paper. Their intelligence rivaled the smartest species in the galaxy. But their loyalty belonged to no one. Well, almost no one. Marcus Chen stood quietly at the back of the group, mopping the floor with practiced efficiency. Nobody paid attention to the human janitor. He was just part of the background, invisible in his simple gray uniform. The other species saw humans as useful but unremarkable, good for manual labor and basic maintenance, but nothing special. Marcus had been working on Station Omega-7 for 3 years. He'd cleaned every corridor, every laboratory, every containment cell. The other workers barely acknowledged him, which suited Marcus just fine. He preferred the quiet solitude of his work to the constant chatter of the research teams. As the group dispersed, Marcus wheeled his cleaning cart closer to the containment chamber. Through the transparent aluminum viewing wall, he could see the 12 dragon eggs nestled in their heated sand beds. Each egg was roughly the size of a human head, with scales that shifted color from deep purple to bright gold depending on the angle of the light. Beautiful, aren't they? Dr. Velkin had returned, studying Marcus with curious yellow eyes. The last of their kind as far as we know. Their genetic material could revolutionize our understanding of plasma-based biology. Marcus nodded politely and continued cleaning. He'd heard this speech before. To the scientists, everything was about research and data. They saw the eggs as specimens, not as living beings who had lost their parents in a senseless war. The first egg cracked 3 days later. Alarms blared throughout the station as automated systems detected the breach. Emergency protocols engaged immediately. Additional energy barriers, temperature adjustments, atmospheric controls. Every precaution the galaxy's best minds could devise. Marcus was cleaning a nearby corridor when the commotion started. Through the viewing window, he watched as a tiny dragon head poked out of the broken shell. The hatchling was no bigger than a house cat, with scales that gleamed like polished emeralds. Its eyes were bright gold, ancient and intelligent despite having just entered the world. The research team crowded around external monitors, afraid to enter the chamber directly. They watched as the hatchling struggled free of its shell, chirping softly. Its cries echoed through the speakers, high-pitched and plaintive. It was calling for its mother who would never come. Marcus felt something twist in his chest. He'd grown up on a farm back on Earth, helping care for newborn animals. He recognized that sound. It was the universal cry of a baby searching for comfort and warmth. The scientists activated feeding protocols, extending mechanical arms into the chamber with carefully prepared nutrients. The hatchling sniffed the offering suspiciously but refused to eat. Instead, it curled up in a corner of the chamber, continuing its lonely calls. Marcus finished his shift and returned to his small quarters, but sleep wouldn't come. He kept thinking about those golden eyes, so full of intelligence and sadness. The dragon wasn't just a specimen, it was a child, orphaned and alone in a sterile prison. When his next shift began, Marcus made his way to the containment level. The research team was in crisis mode. The hatchling still hadn't eaten, and 2 more eggs showed signs of cracking. Dr. Velkin paced back and forth, his tail lashing with agitation. "It's refusing all food sources," one of the technicians reported. "Biological scans show it's healthy but distressed. Stress hormones are elevated beyond normal parameters. Increase the chamber temperature, Dr. Velkin ordered. Perhaps it needs more heat. Temperature is already at optimal levels, sir. Then try adjusting the atmospheric composition. Maybe the oxygen mixture is wrong. Marcus watched the tiny dragon through the viewing wall. It had moved closer to the transparent barrier, as if trying to get closer to the people outside. When it saw Marcus, it pressed its small body against the wall and chirped more insistently. Something about that gesture made Marcus's decision for him. He waited until the research team took their evening break, leaving only the automated systems on guard. The corridor was empty except for the soft hum of machinery. Marcus approached the containment chamber's control panel and began typing. His security clearance was basic, janitorial staff level, but Marcus had been observing the researchers for months. He'd memorized their procedures, watched them input countless access codes. Human pattern recognition was better than most species realized. The first barrier deactivated with a soft chime. Marcus's heart pounded as he worked through the security layers. If he was caught, he'd face immediate deportation back to Earth, probably with criminal charges attached. The final barrier dropped, and Marcus stepped into the chamber. The hatchling looked up at him with those impossibly intelligent golden eyes. For a moment, neither moved. Then the tiny dragon took a hesitant step forward, sniffing curiously at Marcus's outstretched hand. Human body temperature was lower than optimal dragon nesting temperature, but it was warm and alive in a way that no machine could replicate. The hatchling pressed against Marcus's palm, its scales surprisingly soft and warm. Marcus settled cross-legged on the floor, and the hatchling immediately crawled into his lap, curling up like a contented cat. Its breathing slowed, and for the first time since hatching, it fell into peaceful sleep. When the research team returned an hour later, they found Marcus sitting calmly in the chamber with the sleeping dragon. Alarms should have been blaring. Security protocols should have activated. Instead, the chamber's AI systems had classified the situation as non-threatening and continued normal operations. Dr. Velkin's face was a mask of controlled fury. "Human, step away from the specimen immediately." But when Marcus tried to move, the hatchling stirred and made a distressed sound. It gripped his shirt with tiny claws, unwilling to let go. And that's when everyone realized that perhaps the galaxy's most advanced containment systems had missed the most important element of dragon care. Sometimes, the most sophisticated solution was also the simplest one. The emergency council meeting lasted 6 hours. Representatives from 12 different species argued in the station's main conference room, while Marcus waited in a holding cell 3 levels down. The tiny dragon hatchling had been returned to its chamber, where it immediately stopped eating again and resumed its plaintive cries. Dr. Velkin presented his case with cold efficiency. The human violated 17 different security protocols. He compromised a Class A containment system. This breach could have resulted in catastrophic loss of life. Commander Thex, a massive insectoid with clicking mandibles, leaned forward. Yet no harm occurred. In fact, the creature appeared calmer in the human's presence than at any point since hatching. "That's irrelevant," Dr. Velkin snapped. "We cannot allow unauthorized contact with potentially dangerous specimens. The dragons destroyed entire fleets. We have no idea what they might be capable of." Professor Quillen, the elderly cetacean researcher, projected her thoughts through the chamber's water-filled communication sphere. Her translated words rippled across the room's speakers. "Perhaps we should examine why the creature responded so positively to human contact. Our current methods are clearly insufficient." The debate continued through the night. Meanwhile, 3 more eggs cracked open in the containment chamber. Each hatchling emerged calling for parents who would never answer, and each refused the mechanical feeding systems. The chamber filled with the sound of distressed dragon cries. Marcus sat on his cell's narrow bench, listening to the distant sounds echoing through the station's ventilation system. Every chirp and wail made his chest tighten. He'd grown up around animals and he knew the sound of babies in distress. It went against every human instinct to ignore creatures in need. Dr. Sarah Kim, the station's human liaison officer, finally came to see him near dawn. She was one of only 3 humans on the research staff, and her expression was carefully neutral. "Marcus, what were you thinking?" she asked, settling into the chair across from his cell. "You could be facing criminal charges. Unauthorized contact with alien specimens is a serious crime under Galactic Council law." Marcus met her eyes steadily. Those aren't specimens, Dr. Kim, they're babies. Babies who just lost their parents and don't understand why they're alone. They're also potentially dangerous alien predators. Have you actually looked at them? They're the size of house cats. They're scared and hungry and calling for comfort. Marcus leaned forward, his voice earnest. I've worked with newborn animals my entire life. I know what they need. Dr. Kim studied him for a long moment. The council is split. Half want you deported immediately. The other half want to study what happened in that chamber. What do you want? She was quiet for several heartbeats. I want those hatchlings to survive. 3 of them haven't eaten in over 30 hours. They're going to die if we can't figure out how to care for them properly. The chamber doors opened and Dr. Velkin entered with Commander Thex and Professor Quillen. The reptilian's expression was thunderous, but he'd been overruled by the council majority. Human. Dr. Velkin's voice dripped with distaste. You are being granted temporary supervised access to the containment chamber. Your actions will be monitored continuously. Any sign of danger to yourself or the specimens will result in immediate intervention. Marcus nodded. I understand. You will work under Dr. Kim's direct supervision. She will be held responsible for your actions. Dr. Kim straightened. Understood, sir. Commander Thex's compound eyes focused on Marcus. We are curious about human-dragon interaction. This represents unprecedented xenobiological contact. Your species' reactions to infant creatures may provide valuable insight. Professor Quillen's translated voice added, previous dragon encounters involved only adult specimens in combat situations. We have no data on juvenile behavior or socialization patterns. An hour later, Marcus found himself back in the containment chamber, but this time he wasn't alone. Dr. Kim stood nearby with a mobile monitoring station, while cameras tracked his every movement. 4 hatchlings now wandered the chamber, each one calling desperately for comfort they couldn't find. The first hatchling, the little green one Marcus had held before, immediately rushed toward him. Its golden eyes were bright with recognition, and it pressed against his legs with obvious relief. The other 3 approached more cautiously, sniffing at this strange new presence. Marcus settled onto the floor again, and the green hatchling immediately climbed into his lap. The others circled closer, studying him with intelligent curiosity. Their scales shifted color with their emotions, deep blues and purples when distressed, brighter golds and greens when calm. Remarkable, Dr. Kim murmured, watching her instruments. Their stress hormones are dropping rapidly. Heart rates are stabilizing. One of the other hatchlings, this one with scales that shifted from silver to pale blue, crept closer and sniffed at Marcus's hand. When he held still, it pressed its small head against his palm, making a sound like a cross between a purr and a chirp. Within minutes, all 4 hatchlings had clustered around Marcus. 2 in his lap, 1 curled against his side, and the 4th draped across his shoulders like a scaly cat. Their breathing synchronized as they settled into peaceful sleep. Temperature readings are normal, Dr. Kim reported, but their body heat is distributing differently. They're using the human as a supplemental heat source. Dr. Velkin's voice crackled through the chamber speakers. Humans maintain a constant body temperature of approximately 37 degrees Celsius. That's within optimal range for dragon comfort zones. But it's more than just temperature, Marcus said quietly, careful not to wake the sleeping hatchlings. They need contact, physical comfort. Most mammals and reptiles do better with touch, especially as babies. The silver-blue hatchling stirred and made a small sound. Marcus gently stroked its head and it settled back into sleep. The gesture was so natural, so instinctive that he barely thought about it. Dr. Kim's instruments beeped softly. Fascinating. Their brain patterns are showing theta waves consistent with deep, restorative sleep. We haven't seen that level of relaxation since they hatched. Over the next several hours, the transformation was remarkable. When the hatchlings woke, they were alert and curious instead of distressed. They explored their environment, played with each other, and most importantly, they began to eat. Marcus helped with feeding time, holding pieces of specially prepared meat while the babies gnawed on them with tiny, sharp teeth. They were still too young for their flame glands to develop, so they were completely dependent on external food sources. The feeding response is completely different, Dr. Kim observed. They're actually competing with each other to eat instead of refusing food entirely. The green hatchling, who Marcus had started thinking of as Jade, seemed to have appointed itself the leader. It would eat first, then encourage the others to join in. The silver-blue one, Quicksilver, was the most curious, constantly investigating new objects and sounds. The third, with scales like burnished copper, stayed close to Marcus at all times. The fourth, whose scales shifted through every color of the rainbow, seemed to be the group's guardian, always watching for potential threats. As evening approached, all 4 hatchlings grew drowsy again. They clustered around Marcus, seeking the comfort of his warmth and presence. Their small bodies radiated contentment as they settled into sleep. Dr. Velkin entered the chamber, his movements careful and controlled. The hatchlings stirred but didn't flee. Instead, they watched him with curious eyes, secure in Marcus's presence. "The council has reached a decision," Dr. Velkin announced. "You will be assigned as primary caretaker for the dragon specimens. Dr. Kim will oversee all scientific aspects of their care." Marcus looked up, surprised. "What about my regular duties?" "You have new duties now. The hatchling's survival takes priority over everything else." Dr. Velkin's expression was unreadable. 8 more eggs remain unhatched. When they emerge, they will need the same care. That night, Marcus was given new quarters adjacent to the containment chamber. The hatchlings protested when he tried to leave, so the scientists set up a cot inside the chamber itself. As Marcus settled down to sleep surrounded by 4 tiny dragons, he realized his life had just changed in ways he never could have imagined. These weren't just alien specimens anymore. They were becoming his responsibility, his family, and somewhere in the back of his mind, he wondered what would happen when they grew larger, stronger, and developed the legendary powers their parents had possessed. Would they remember the human who had comforted them as babies? Time would tell. 3 weeks passed in a blur of feeding schedules, cleaning duties, and constant observation. The 4 hatchlings had grown noticeably larger, now roughly the size of medium dogs. Their personalities became more distinct each day. Jade remained the natural leader, organizing the group's activities and establishing a pecking order. Quicksilver had developed an alarming habit of trying to dismantle anything electronic within reach. Copper never strayed far from Marcus's side, while Rainbow had appointed itself the group's sentinel, always watching for danger. Dr. Kim documented everything with scientific precision. Sleep patterns, feeding behaviors, growth rates, social hierarchies. The data painted a picture of creatures far more complex than anyone had anticipated. "Their intelligence quotient is off the charts," she told Marcus during one of their daily briefings. "Individual problem-solving abilities rival most adult sentient species. But they only demonstrate peak performance when you're present." Marcus was cleaning one of Quicksilver's latest engineering projects, the remains of a monitoring device the hatchling had successfully reduced to component parts. They're pack animals, social creatures. They need stability and familiar connections. But why specifically humans? We've tried introducing them to other species. They tolerate Dr. Velkin and Commander Thex, but they only truly bond with you. Before Marcus could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Not the gentle chimes of feeding time or environmental adjustments, but the sharp, urgent warnings of genuine emergency. Dr. Velkin's voice echoed through the communication system. "All personnel to emergency stations? We have multiple egg breaches in progress." Marcus rushed to the observation window overlooking the main hatching chamber. All 8 remaining eggs were cracking simultaneously, their shells splitting apart with audible snaps. Emergency protocols engaged automatically. Additional heating, atmospheric adjustments, containment barriers. The 4 adolescent dragons clustered around Marcus, sensing his tension. Jade chirped nervously while Rainbow's scales shifted to protective dark colors. They could hear the cries of their newly hatched siblings through the chamber's audio feeds. 8 tiny voices joined in a chorus of distress that made Marcus's heart ache. Unlike the first 4, these hatchlings emerged into a world of mechanical arms and automated feeding systems with no comfort in sight. Dr. Kim arrived at a run, her tablet already displaying emergency readings. Stress levels are critical. They're going into shock from sensory overload. Through the viewing window, Marcus watched the newly hatched dragons huddled together in terror. The automated systems extended feeding arms, but the babies fled from the mechanical intrusions. Their cries grew more desperate. "I need to go in there," Marcus said. Dr. Velkin appeared beside them, his expression grim. "Absolutely not. 8 distressed hatchlings present far too great a risk. We'll modify the feeding protocols." "They don't need modified protocols. They need comfort." Marcus turned to face the reptilian administrator. Look at them. They're terrified. They're also growing rapidly. These 8 are already larger than the first 4 were at hatching. Their bite force could sever a human finger. Jade pressed against Marcus's leg and made a complex series of chirps and trills. The other 3 responded with similar sounds, creating what sounded almost like language. Dr. Kim's eyes widened as she studied her readings. Marcus, I think they're trying to communicate something specific. The vocalizations have definite patterns. Quicksilver scurried over to the chamber controls and began examining the access panel. Its small claws traced the button sequences it had watched the scientist use hundreds of times. It's trying to open the door, Dr. Kim breathed. It understands the control system. Rainbow positioned itself between the adults and the control panel, scales shifting to aggressive red and gold patterns. Copper curled around Marcus's feet, anchoring him in place with gentle but insistent pressure. They want to help their siblings, Marcus realized. They're asking me to let them into the hatching chamber. Dr. Velkin's tail lashed with agitation. Impossible. We cannot allow unsupervised contact between specimen groups. The cries from the hatching chamber grew more desperate. Through the monitors, they could see the 8 new hatchlings pressed against the walls, trying to escape the automated feeding systems they perceived as threats. Marcus made his decision quickly. Dr. Kim, what's the emergency override code for life-threatening situations? She hesitated. Marcus, you can't be serious. Those babies are going to die from stress if we don't do something. You said it yourself. Their readings are critical. Dr. Velkin stepped forward. Human, I order you to stand down. But Jade had already solved the problem. The clever hatchling had been watching Quicksilver's examination of the controls, and now it pressed a specific sequence of buttons with its claws. The door to the hatching chamber slid open with a soft hiss. Before anyone could react, all 4 adolescent dragons rushed through the opening. Marcus followed without hesitation, leaving the scientist shouting behind him. The scene inside the hatching chamber was chaos. 8 tiny dragons huddled in corners while automated arms waved food offerings they refused to accept. The newcomers were smaller than Marcus's 4, but their fear made them seem impossibly fragile. Jade immediately took charge, approaching the nearest group of hatchlings with calm, authoritative chirps. The babies responded to their older sibling's voice, crawling closer with desperate relief. Quicksilver and Rainbow flanked the mechanical feeding arms, somehow signaling the automated systems to withdraw. Copper stayed close to Marcus as he knelt in the center of the chamber. One by one, the terrified hatchlings crept toward him, drawn by the same instinct that had comforted their older siblings. Soon Marcus found himself at the center of a pile of 12 dragon babies. The 8 newcomers were cautious at first, but the calm confidence of the older 4 gradually spread through the group. Stress calls faded into contented purrs. Dr. Kim entered the chamber cautiously, her monitoring equipment tracking the rapid improvement in vital signs. Remarkable. Stress hormones are dropping across the board, heart rate stabilizing. Dr. Velkin appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. 12 dragons, all looking to a single human for guidance and comfort. Marcus felt the weight of 12 small lives depending on him. Each hatchling had distinct markings and personality traits already emerging. Some were bold, others shy. Some were curious, others cautious. But all of them seemed to recognize him as something essential to their well-being. The xenobiology department will want extensive documentation, Dr. Velkin continued. This level of interspecies bonding is unprecedented. One of the new hatchlings, this one with scales that shifted from deep purple to bright orange, crawled into Marcus's lap and immediately fell asleep. The others quickly followed suit, creating a living blanket of warmth and trust. They're going to need a larger space, Marcus said quietly, and more complex environments as they grow. Dragons are intelligent creatures. They'll need mental stimulation, social interaction, challenges to solve. Dr. Kim nodded, taking notes. We can modify the adjoining chambers, create a more natural habitat. Commander Thex arrived with a full security detail but stopped short when he saw the peaceful scene. 12 dragons sleeping contentedly around their human caretaker presented no threat to anyone. The Council will need to revise our protocols, the insectoid commander observed. Current containment procedures are clearly inadequate for juvenile dragon care. That night, As Marcus settled into his cot surrounded by 12 sleeping dragons, he realized the magnitude of what was happening. These weren't just alien specimens anymore. They were individuals with names, personalities, and bonds that transcended species. Jade curled up against his right side, already showing signs of the leadership qualities that would make her formidable as an adult. Quicksilver had claimed his left shoulder, tiny claws gripping his shirt even in sleep. Rainbow positioned itself where it could watch the chamber entrance, ever vigilant. The 8 newcomers had integrated quickly into the group hierarchy. There was Ember, with orange-purple scales and a fearless attitude. Storm, whose silver-gray coloring matched a cautious but curious personality. Frost, nearly white with pale blue undertones, who seemed to be the most intellectual of the group. And 5 others, each unique, each precious. As Marcus drifted off to sleep, he wondered what the future held. These dragons would grow large and powerful. Their parents had been living weapons capable of taking on entire fleets. What would happen when their children reached maturity? Would they remember the human who had cared for them as babies? Would the bonds they were forming now last into adulthood? And perhaps most importantly, what did it mean that the galaxy's most feared predators had chosen to trust a simple human janitor with their most vulnerable young? The answers to those questions would change everything. 6 months had transformed everything about Station Omega-7. What began as a secure research facility now resembled something between a nursery and a training ground. The dragons had grown exponentially, each now roughly the size of a large horse, and their intelligence had developed far beyond anyone's expectations. Marcus stood in the center of the expanded habitat complex, watching 12 young dragons practice what could only be described as coordinated tactics. Jade had organized them into groups, with Rainbow and Storm serving as squadron leaders. They moved through complex maneuvers, testing each other's reflexes and abilities. Their learning curve is exponential, Dr. Kim reported, reviewing data on her tablet. Problem-solving abilities now exceed most doctoral-level researchers, and they're teaching each other concepts we haven't even introduced. Marcus nodded, observing Quicksilver and Frost collaborate on dismantling and rebuilding a piece of equipment. They'd figured out not just how the machinery worked, but how to improve its efficiency. Their modifications were consistently more elegant than the original designs. Dr. Velkin approached with his usual measured stride, but Marcus noticed the reptilian's demeanor had changed over the past months. Where once there had been suspicion and irritation, now there was genuine respect tinged with something approaching awe. "The Galactic Council has received your latest reports," Dr. Velkin announced. "They're concerned about the implications." "What kind of implications?" 12 dragons with unprecedented intelligence, trained in coordination and tactics, absolutely loyal to a single human. Dr. Velkin's yellow eyes met Marcus's steadily. Some council members view this as a potential threat. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. They're just babies. Well, young adults now, but still developing. Babies who can already breathe plasma hot enough to melt through hull plating. Babies who yesterday figured out how to hack into the station's navigation system just to see how it worked. Dr. Velkin gestured toward Ember, who was currently suspended upside down from the ceiling, apparently for fun. Their physical capabilities are developing as rapidly as their intellectual ones. It was true. Last week, Copper had accidentally demonstrated its flame breath during an enthusiastic greeting, leaving a small crater in the reinforced floor. The incident had triggered every alarm on the station, though the dragon had been more surprised than anyone else by the development. Jade approached them with the fluid grace that had replaced her earlier clumsy movements. Her scales now shifted through complex patterns that Marcus had learned to read like facial expressions. Currently, she was displaying curiosity mixed with concern. She made a series of complex vocalizations that had evolved far beyond simple chirps. The dragons had developed their own language, incorporating sounds, scale patterns, and body positions into sophisticated communication. She's asking about the worried anger sense from the newcomers who visited yesterday. Dr. Kim translated. The dragon's sensory capabilities included detecting human pheromones and emotional states through scent. Yesterday's visitors had been a delegation from the Galactic Council's Security Division. They'd toured the facility with obvious unease, taking extensive recordings and asking pointed questions about containment protocols. Marcus reached out to stroke Jade's neck, a gesture that would have been unthinkable with her wild adult parents but felt perfectly natural now. "Everything's fine, girl, just some concerned officials." But Jade's expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. The dragons had become increasingly protective of Marcus, and they'd noticed the tension surrounding recent visits. Commander Thex entered the habitat complex, his compound eyes tracking the movements of 12 potentially dangerous predators with apparent ease. The insectoid had developed an unexpected rapport with the dragons, though nothing approaching Marcus's bond with them. "We need to discuss the upcoming maturation phase," Commander Thex announced. "Adult dragons are solitary creatures, except during mating. Current socialization patterns may not persist." Dr. Kim looked up from her tablet. "Actually, our observations suggest otherwise. These dragons are developing pack behaviors that don't exist in wild populations. Their social structure is more complex than anything we've documented." It was true. The dragons had established a hierarchy with Jade as the acknowledged leader, but it wasn't based on dominance or aggression. Instead, they'd created a system based on individual strengths and expertise. Quicksilver handled technical problems. Rainbow managed security. Frost served as the group's intellectual leader, and so on. Storm approached Commander Thex and made a questioning trill. The silver-gray dragon had become fascinated with military tactics and often pestered the commander for demonstrations of strategic concepts. "They're not developing like wild dragons because they're not wild," Marcus realized. "They're domesticated. Or rather, they've chosen to domesticate themselves through their bond with humanity." Dr. Velkin's head tilted thoughtfully. "An intriguing hypothesis. Dragons choosing civilization over their natural instincts." The implications were staggering. Dragons had always been viewed as forces of nature, untamable and ultimately hostile to all other species. But these 12 had integrated human concepts of cooperation, hierarchy, and social responsibility into their development. Copper, who had been napping in a sunny corner, suddenly raised its head with alert attention. The other dragons responded immediately, their scales shifting to warning colors. Something had caught their attention. Marcus felt the tension ripple through the group even before the station's alarms began sounding. These weren't the gentle tones of routine alerts, but the harsh warnings of genuine emergency. Dr. Velkin's communicator crackled to life. "Sir, we have an unscheduled arrival. Imperial battlecruiser demanding permission to board." The temperature in the habitat complex seemed to drop several degrees. The Empire had been conspicuously absent from all discussions about the dragons, but everyone knew they'd been monitoring the situation. Imperial policy regarding powerful alien species was straightforward and brutal. Jade moved to Marcus's side, her scales now displaying full combat patterns of red and gold. The other 11 dragons arranged themselves in a protective formation around him, their earlier playfulness replaced by focused intensity. "They can sense your fear," Dr. Kim observed, watching the dragon's coordinated response. "And they're responding as a unit." Marcus forced himself to remain calm, knowing the dragons would pick up on his emotional state. But inside, his mind was racing. The Empire's arrival could only mean one thing. They'd decided the dragons represented too great a threat to remain in civilian hands. Commander Thex's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of agitation. "Imperial forces are already docking. They're claiming authority under the Dangerous Species Protocol." The Dangerous Species Protocol allowed the Empire to seize any alien life forms deemed threatening to galactic security. It had been used to justify genocide on more than one occasion. Dr. Velkin's expression was grim. "How long until they reach this level? 15 minutes, maybe 20 if we delay at security checkpoints." Jade made a complex series of sounds to the other dragons. Whatever she communicated caused immediate action. Storm and Rainbow moved to defensive positions near the habitat entrances. Quicksilver and Frost began examining the chamber's technical systems. The remaining 8 arranged themselves in a protective circle around Marcus. "They know," Marcus said quietly. "They understand what's happening." Dr. Kim's tablet showed spikes in dragon neural activity across the board. Their brainwave patterns are unlike anything we've recorded. They're functioning as a single coordinated intelligence. The sound of marching boots echoed from the corridor outside. Heavy, synchronized steps that could only belong to Imperial shock troops. The dragon's scales shifted to darker colors, and Marcus could feel heat building in the air around them. For the first time since their parents' deaths, the dragons were preparing for war, and they were preparing to fight for their human family. The Imperial troops entered the habitat complex with practiced precision. 12 soldiers in black armor, energy weapons charged and ready. Their leader, a scarred human with Colonel's insignia, surveyed the scene with cold calculation. "I am Colonel Drake of the Imperial Security Division," he announced. "By order of the Galactic Council's Emergency Committee, we are here to relocate these specimens to a secure Imperial facility." The 12 dragons remained perfectly still, but Marcus could feel the tension radiating from their bodies. Jade's scales had darkened to deep crimson, while heat shimmers began rising from the group. Not quite flame yet, but a clear warning. Dr. Velkin stepped forward carefully. "Colonel, these creatures are under scientific protection protocols. Any relocation would require extensive documentation and approval from multiple departments. The situation has changed," Colonel Drake replied curtly. "Intelligence reports suggest these specimens pose an immediate threat to galactic security. They've demonstrated abilities beyond our containment capabilities." Dr. Kim moved closer to her monitoring station, her hands shaking slightly as she activated recording protocols. "What specific abilities are you referring to?" "Coordinated tactical behavior, technological manipulation, and most concerning, the development of what appears to be psychic communication networks." The Colonel's eyes fixed on Marcus, all centered around a single human operative. Marcus felt 12 pairs of dragon eyes watching him, waiting for his response. The bond between them had grown so strong that he sometimes felt like he could sense their thoughts. Now that connection thrummed with protective fury. "I'm not an operative," Marcus said quietly. "I'm a janitor who cared for orphan babies. A janitor who somehow convinced the galaxy's most dangerous predators to follow his orders." Colonel Drake gestured to his troops, who began spreading out around the chamber. "Our psychologists believe you've created some form of pack bond, making yourself the alpha of a dragon coalition." Quicksilver made a low, threatening sound that Marcus had never heard before. The young dragon's intelligence had always been focused on puzzles and mechanisms, but now that brilliant mind was clearly calculating angles of attack and defensive possibilities. "Stand down," Marcus said firmly, and Quicksilver immediately relaxed. The demonstration only seemed to confirm the Colonel's suspicions. Commander Thex entered with his own security detail, but the insectoid moved with careful neutrality. "Colonel Drake, I must protest this action. These dragons are sentient beings, not property to be relocated at will. They're weapons," Colonel Drake snapped. "Living weapons with the intelligence to coordinate attacks and the loyalty to follow human commands. Do you understand what that means?" Dr. Velkin's tail lashed with agitation. "It means we have an unprecedented opportunity for peaceful interspecies cooperation. These dragons chose civilization over their violent instincts. Or they're planning something more sophisticated than anything we've seen before." The Colonel activated a handheld scanner, studying the readings with obvious concern. Thermal output suggests they're priming their flame glands. Neural activity indicates coordinated threat assessment. It was true. Marcus could feel the dragon's readiness for combat like a growing storm. They weren't just protecting him anymore. They were protecting their family, their home, their chosen way of life. Jade took a single step forward, and every Imperial weapon tracked toward her. The massive dragon's scales now displayed full war patterns, ancient genetic memories of her parents' battles against these same Imperial forces. She spoke, not in the complex dragon language she used with her siblings, but in carefully pronounced human words. "No, take Marcus." The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Kim's tablet clattered to the floor as she stared in shock. Nobody had realized the dragons were learning human speech. Colonel Drake's face went pale. "Impossible. Dragons don't have the vocal structures for human language. These dragons do many impossible things," Dr. Velkin observed dryly. Jade continued, her pronunciation improving with each word. "Marcus, family protect family. The other dragons began vocalizing as well, each struggling with unfamiliar sounds but making their meaning clear. Family. Protect. No take. They've been listening, Dr. Kim whispered. Months of human conversation, learning our language while we thought they were just growing and playing. Storm stepped beside Jade, adding its voice to the declaration. Humans. Good. Empire. Bad. Parents. Dead. Empire. Killed. The implications hit everyone simultaneously. These dragons remembered their parents' deaths. They knew who had been responsible, and they'd spent months learning about human concepts of justice, loyalty, and family. Colonel Drake raised his weapon. All personnel step away from the specimens. We're implementing emergency containment protocols. No. The word came from Marcus, but it was echoed by 12 dragon voices in perfect unison. The temperature in the chamber spiked dramatically. 12 young dragons, each now large enough to challenge an adult of most species, began generating heat signatures that made the air shimmer. Their flame glands had reached full maturity, but they didn't attack. Instead, they formed a protective circle around Marcus, Dr. Kim, Dr. Velkin, and Commander Thex. The message was clear. They would defend their chosen family, but they wouldn't initiate violence. Remarkable, Commander Thex observed. They're demonstrating the very civilized restraint that the Empire claims they lack. Colonel Drake's scanner was beeping frantically as thermal readings climbed toward dangerous levels. They're preparing to attack. All units prepare for combat. Wait. Dr. Kim stepped forward, her hands raised peacefully. Let me try something. She activated her tablet's translation program and began speaking in the complex dragon language the 12 had developed. Her pronunciation was halting, but the meaning was clear enough. The dragon's scales shifted to curious patterns as they listened. Jade responded with a series of sounds that the tablet struggled to translate. She's asking for a formal challenge, Dr. Kim announced. Dragon law as near as I can understand it. Single combat between champions to determine the fate of the group. Colonel Drake laughed harshly. There is no dragon law. They're animals. Animals don't develop legal systems, Dr. Velkin pointed out. Animals don't learn multiple languages. Animals don't demonstrate the moral restraint we're witnessing here. Jade spoke again, this time mixing human and dragon words. Challenge, honor, combat, decide, fate. She gestured toward Marcus, then toward Colonel Drake. The meaning was unmistakable. She was offering single combat between the human champions, with the outcome determining whether the dragons would be taken by Imperial forces. Absolutely not, Colonel Drake snapped. We don't negotiate with specimens. But Marcus was studying Jade's expression, reading the complex patterns in her scales. There was something else in her proposal, something the translation system wasn't catching. What's the rest of it? He asked Jade directly. The dragon's response was careful and deliberate. If Marcus wins, dragons choose future. If Colonel wins, dragons go. Imperial. Dr. Kim's eyes widened as she worked through the implications. They're offering to abide by the results of human combat. They're submitting to human judgment about their own fate. The proposal was brilliant in its simplicity. If Marcus won, the dragons would be free to choose their own path. If he lost, they would go peacefully with Imperial forces. Either way, no dragon blood would be shed. Colonel Drake studied the 12 massive creatures surrounding them. Each one was capable of melting through starship armor, but they were voluntarily restraining themselves, offering a peaceful resolution to a potentially catastrophic confrontation. Very well, he said finally. But this will be combat with Imperial weapons and Imperial rules. Marcus nodded, though his heart was pounding. He'd never been a soldier, never trained for combat. But looking at the faces of 12 dragons who trusted him completely, he knew he had to try. The fate of an entire species now rested on a simple human janitor who had learned to love creatures the galaxy feared above all else. The station's main cargo bay had been cleared for the combat. Word had spread through every deck, and representatives from dozens of species gathered to witness what might be the most significant moment in galactic history. Not just a fight, but a trial that would determine whether dragons could truly integrate into civilized society. Marcus stood at one end of the bay, wearing standard-issue combat armor that felt awkward and unfamiliar. In his hands was an Imperial pulse rifle, a weapon he'd never fired in anger. Across the bay, Colonel Drake checked his equipment with professional efficiency, his scarred face showing no emotion. The 12 dragons occupied a raised observation platform, their scales shifting through anxious patterns. Jade had explained the rules to her siblings in their complex language, and all had agreed to abide by the outcome. If Marcus fell, they would go peacefully, with Imperial forces. Dr. Kim stood at the referee station with Commander Thex and Dr. Velkin. Her hands shook as she activated the recording systems that would document this unprecedented event. Combat will continue until one participant yields or is incapacitated, Commander Thex announced. Lethal force is authorized, though non-fatal victory is preferred. Colonel Drake raised his weapon. You realize this is pointless, Janitor. I've spent 20 years in Imperial Special Forces. You're a civilian with no combat training. Marcus adjusted his grip on the pulse rifle, trying to remember the basic safety instruction he'd received. Maybe, but I'm fighting for family. Family? The colonel laughed. They're predators who've manipulated your emotions. The moment you're gone, they'll revert to their true nature. From the observation platform, Jade made a sound like a cross between a roar and a sob. The other dragons pressed closer to her, offering comfort to their leader who was watching her human father prepare for battle. The starting signal echoed through the bay. Colonel Drake moved immediately, his training evident in every step. He used the cargo containers for cover, advancing with tactical precision while laying down suppressing fire. Energy bolts sparked against the bulkheads around Marcus as he dove for shelter. Marcus had no military training, but he'd spent years observing. He'd watched the dragons learn, adapt, and develop strategies. More importantly, he'd learned from them about pack coordination and thinking 3 steps ahead. Instead of trying to match the colonel's aggressive advance, Marcus retreated deeper into the maze of cargo containers. He knew this bay better than anyone. He'd cleaned every corner of it hundreds of times. Running already? Colonel Drake called out. This is what the dragons chose as their champion? Energy bolts exploded against Marcus's cover as the colonel pressed his attack. The Imperial officer was clearly trying to end the fight quickly, using superior firepower and training to overwhelm his opponent. But Marcus wasn't thinking like a soldier. He was thinking like a custodian who understood how every system in this bay functioned. He'd noticed during his cleaning duties that the environmental controls for this section could be manually accessed from several maintenance panels. Emergency protocols allowed for rapid atmospheric adjustment in case of cargo bay decompression. While Colonel Drake advanced through the container maze, Marcus worked his way toward one of the maintenance access points. Energy bolts sizzled past his head as he manually triggered the emergency fog protocol. Instantly, the bay filled with dense white vapor designed to help locate hull breaches. Visibility dropped to near zero. Clever. Colonel Drake's voice echoed through the fog. But Imperial armor includes thermal imaging. I can still track you. That was exactly what Marcus was counting on. He'd watched Jade teach the other dragons about misdirection, using their intelligence to overcome superior physical opponents. Marcus triggered his own armor's heating elements, then shed the outer shell near a thermal vent. The combination would create a heat signature that might fool thermal sensors, at least briefly. Moving through the fog in just his basic clothing, Marcus circled toward where he'd last heard the colonel's voice. The pulse rifle felt heavy in his hands, but he'd learned patience from caring for dragons. Sometimes the best strategy was to wait for the right moment. The fog began to thin as the atmospheric systems worked to clear it. Through the wisps of vapor, Marcus could see Colonel Drake advancing toward the thermal decoy, weapon raised and ready. Come out, Janitor. Stop hiding behind tricks and fight like a man. Marcus stepped out of concealment 20 meters behind the colonel. I am fighting like a man who learned from dragons that intelligence beats brute force. Colonel Drake spun around, his weapon tracking toward Marcus. But months of dragon reflexes training had taught Marcus about timing and precision. He'd learned from Quicksilver about finding the exact moment when complex systems were vulnerable. The pulse bolt meant for Marcus struck a critical power coupling instead. The cargo bay's lighting systems flickered and failed, plunging the space into near darkness broken only by emergency illumination. In the dim red light, the two men faced each other across the bay. Both weapons were raised, both were breathing hard, but now they were on equal footing. You can't win, Colonel Drake said, but there was less certainty in his voice. Even if you defeat me, the Empire will send others. They'll never stop viewing dragons as threats. Maybe, Marcus replied. But today, right here, we prove that dragons can choose civilization over violence. That they can be family instead of weapons. From the observation platform, Jade's voice carried clearly through the bay. Marcus, family, always. The other dragons took up the chant. Family, always, Marcus. Family. Colonel Drake's expression shifted as the full implications hit him. These weren't mindless beasts following programmed loyalty. They were individuals making conscious choices about their values and relationships. They really do love you, he said quietly. And I love them, all of them. They're not specimens or weapons or political problems. They're children who grew up choosing to be better than their instincts. The colonel's weapon wavered slightly. The Empire won't accept that. They'll see only the threat. Then the Empire needs to learn what I learned. That the most dangerous mistake you can make is underestimating the power of love to transform even the fiercest predator into family. For a long moment, the two men stood in the red emergency lighting, weapons aimed at each other while 12 dragons watched in silence. Then Colonel Drake slowly lowered his rifle. I yield, he said quietly. The dragons have proven their case better than any weapon could. The bay erupted in cheers from dozens of species as the implications spread. Not just a human victory, but proof that the galaxy's most feared predators had chosen peace, family, and civilization over their violent heritage. But as Marcus was lifted onto the shoulders of celebrating researchers, a new alarm began sounding throughout the station. Not the harsh tones of combat alerts, but the deep, ominous warnings that meant only one thing. The main Imperial fleet had arrived, and they weren't interested in individual combat or diplomatic solutions. The real test was just beginning. Admiral Corvin's voice cut through the station's communication system like a blade through silk. This is Imperial Dreadnought Dominator. Station Omega-7 will surrender the dragon specimens immediately or face the consequences. Marcus stood in the station's command center, still wearing his combat gear from the bout with Colonel Drake. Around him, representatives from dozens of species worked frantically at their stations, while 12 young dragons arranged themselves in protective formation. 12 ships, Commander Thex reported, his compound eyes reflecting the tactical display. Full battle group with enough firepower to reduce this station to debris. Dr. Velkin's scales had paled to a sickly yellow. Admiral Corvin has a reputation for decisive action. He won't negotiate. Through the viewports, the Imperial fleet hung in space like predatory birds. Their weapons were already charged, targeting systems locked onto the station's critical systems. The message was clear: surrender or die. Colonel Drake stood at Marcus's side, his earlier hostility replaced by grim determination. I know Corvin. He sees the dragons as weapons that could tip the balance of galactic power. He'll destroy the station before allowing them to remain free. Jade approached Marcus, her scales shifting through complex patterns that had become as readable to him as human facial expressions. She was asking for permission to fight, to defend their family and home with the same fury their parents had shown. No, Marcus said firmly. Violence isn't the answer. It never was. But Marcus, Dr. Kim interrupted, studying her tactical readings. They're not going to listen to reason. Corvin has authorization to use whatever force necessary. Marcus looked around the command center at the faces of the scientists, researchers, and crew members who had become family over the past months. Then he looked at the 12 dragons who trusted him completely, even in the face of overwhelming odds. An idea began forming, born from months of watching dragon intelligence and human ingenuity work together. Jade, he said quietly. Can you and the others link your communication systems with the station's transmission array? The dragon tilted her massive head thoughtfully. Over the past months, Quicksilver and Frost had become expert at interfacing with the station's technology. They'd demonstrated an intuitive understanding of electronic systems that bordered on the supernatural. Jade made a series of complex sounds to her siblings. Quicksilver immediately scurried to the nearest interface panel, while Frost approached the main communication console. The other dragons positioned themselves around the command center, their scales beginning to glow with soft bioluminescent patterns. What are you planning? Dr. Velkin asked. Something that's never been tried before, Marcus replied. We're going to let the dragons speak for themselves. Within minutes, Quicksilver and Frost had established connections between the dragons, bioelectric systems, and the station's communication array. The process was far beyond human understanding, but the results were unmistakable. The station's transmission power increased exponentially as 12 dragon minds linked together. Admiral Corvin, Marcus spoke into the communication system. I'm requesting permission to address your fleet directly. Negative. You have 5 minutes to begin evacuation procedures before we open fire. Marcus nodded to Jade, who touched the communication panel with one claw. Suddenly, every screen in the Imperial fleet began displaying the same image. 12 young dragons arranged peacefully around their human family. But more than that, the dragons began to speak. Not in the harsh, threatening roars that Imperial propaganda had taught the galaxy to fear, but in careful, measured words that demonstrated intelligence, compassion, and wisdom. We are the children of the dragons you killed. Jade's voice carried across space to every ship in the fleet. We remember our parents' deaths. We remember the fear and hatred that drove your weapons. Storm stepped forward, adding her voice to the transmission. But we choose a different path. We choose family over vengeance. We choose love over war. One by one, each dragon spoke directly to the Imperial fleet. They talked about their growth, their learning, their conscious choice to embrace civilization rather than follow their species' violent reputation. They spoke of Marcus, not as a master or controller, but as a father who had taught them that strength could be gentle, that power could protect rather than destroy. You see weapons, Ember said, her orange scales shifting to peaceful blue patterns. We see ourselves as children learning to be better than our instincts. You fear what we might become, Frost added. We hope to become what you need us to be, friends, allies, family. The transmission continued for nearly an hour as each dragon shared their individual personality, hopes, and dreams. They demonstrated their intelligence through complex mathematical concepts, their creativity through original poetry and art, their compassion through stories of caring for smaller creatures. They showed the galaxy what dragons could be when raised with love instead of fear. Marcus watched the tactical displays as something unprecedented happened across the Imperial fleet. Ships that had been in attack formation began standing down. Individual captains were requesting permission to speak with their crews. The rigid military hierarchy was wavering as soldiers and officers grappled with the implications of what they were hearing. Colonel Drake monitored military communication channels, his expression growing more amazed by the minute. Half the fleet is requesting clarification of orders. Some captains are reporting crew members refusing to fire on sentient beings who've committed no crimes. Admiral Corvin's voice finally crackled through the speakers again, but the absolute authority was gone, replaced by uncertainty. This is some kind of trick. Dragons don't speak, don't reason, don't what? Jade interrupted, her voice carrying across the void with gentle dignity. Don't feel love? Don't choose peace? Don't grow beyond their origins? Copper, who had been silent throughout the transmission, finally spoke. Admiral Corvin, you lost your son in the Dragon Wars. We are sorry for your pain. We cannot bring him back, but we can promise that no child will die from dragonfire while we live. The silence that followed was deafening. Admiral Corvin's personal tragedy was classified information, but the dragons had somehow sensed the grief that drove his hatred. When the Admiral spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. How did you know about my son? Because we know loss, Rainbow replied. We know the pain of losing family. We know the anger that comes after. But we learned that anger only creates more loss. Dr. Kim was monitoring dozens of communication channels as word of the transmission spread throughout the galaxy. News networks, government officials, civilian populations. Everyone was watching 12 young dragons choose diplomacy over destruction. It's working, she breathed. Public opinion is shifting across multiple systems. The Senate is calling for emergency sessions to reconsider dragon policies. Commander Thex approached Marcus with something resembling awe in his compound eyes. You've done something remarkable, human. You've shown the galaxy that even its most feared enemies can choose to become its greatest allies. As the hours passed, the Imperial fleet remained in position but did not fire. Communications flooded in from across known space as governments, organizations, and individuals offered support for the Dragon's right to choose their own destiny. Admiral Corvin finally spoke one last time. The fleet is withdrawing pending Senate review. The Dragons will remain on Station Omega-7 under international protection until formal policies can be established. Marcus felt 12 sets of relieved dragon eyes watching him as the Imperial ships began their departure. They had won not through violence or superior firepower, but through the simple revolutionary act of showing the galaxy that love could transform even the most dangerous predators into family. As the weeks passed, Station Omega-7 became something unprecedented, a home where humans and dragons lived together as equals, as family, as proof that the future could be built on understanding rather than fear. And in the center of it all was a simple human janitor who had learned the most important lesson in the galaxy. Sometimes the most powerful force in the universe is just love, patience, and the willingness to see beyond what others expect to what could be. The Dragons had chosen their path, and the galaxy would never be the same.